Well, one of the huge stories today is US President Donald Trump's announcement of new import tariffs of countries around the world, with a 10% across the board tariff on all countries and higher for others, including South Africa, which will now have to pay 30% on all US exports. Around 10% of all South African exports go to the United States. Citrus, steel and the automobile sector will be especially hard hit as they fall most of the country's exports to America. Tshetlhe Litheko, Chief Policy Officer at NAAMSA, joins us now to discuss the impact these tariffs will have on this industry in South Africa. Good afternoon and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon and thank you for inviting me.
Well, 30% is one of the higher tariffs that will be imposed on countries around the world. Were you expecting it to be this high?
Look, the truth is that the 25% which came 3 days earlier was also quite a shock to the industry, and 30% and the mechanisms at how they got to 30% as well was quite worrisome, in that you had to start first with the trade deficit to America, which put South Africa at a place where we are sending 9,000 billion worth of products more to America than they're sending our direction. So that position was already negative. Mm-hmm. And to come then to, it was a trade-related measure that South Africa imposed on America to get to the 60%. And so therefore, we then deserve the 30%. Even the workings of that equation is quite problematic, and I'm not sure that anyone would have expected it.
How do you think this is going to impact the industry, especially jobs?
So if you consider that all industries are purely driven by volume, South Africa created a PDP, which is our policy framework, which says that as long as we can export products to a bigger market than that we have in South Africa of 62 million people, we can then keep these industries relevant in the economy. So South Africa now can produce over 600,000 units of vehicles because there's other global markets that buy from the products that we produce. And unfortunately, this would then hamper that volume equation. Now, we call South Africa's auto industry a high growth sector, in that for every 1% growth in production, we've seen job creation responding at about 4%. And so we're going to have to cut down volumes because of this one market that now has this pressure that's going to make cars from South Africa a lot more expensive for American consumers to buy.
Now, will NAAMSA now start looking at strengthening ties with BRICS counterparts to boost exports to those countries as an alternative?
Look, there are two levers here that we should consider. One is that our primary market is still the EU and the European Union, and the UK. And the challenge with that one particular market is that it already has a sunset on the type of cars that we're producing, which are ICE vehicles. And they are moving towards new energy vehicles, which we call electric cars and so forth. And the challenge is, because they've got that sunset, the cars that we're making are not necessarily relevant for that market. And so we should also accelerate policies locally that will make that market continue to be a relevant market for our vehicles. And that's the one aspect of it that we need to now accelerate as a country, so that we make cars for that one market that's an anchoring market for us as a country. Then the second one is exactly what you said. But however, I would like to bring it a lot more closer and say the Africa Continental Free Trade Area presents those type of prospects for us. Because if you consider that within the continent and the region, we've got about 1.4 million markets that we're sending quite a few amount of cars to. So how well we accelerate those conversations around Africa's integration and creating that one market, and considering what type of business we could do within the continent and accelerating that work, also presents another buffer for the industry. And it's an area that we could also look into for how we then buffer the industry against these changes in the United States.
Now, countries like China and Germany, some car models are produced here in South Africa. Do you think they'll still see South Africa as a viable route when it is no longer a cheaper option for exports to America?
Yeah, so I think for perspective as well, if we were to step back just for the benefit of your viewers, and again, because this is a true story, America is responsible for 6.5% of the exports that South Africa has of vehicles. So that particular percentage is significantly small, in that it does not represent our primary market, which is the EU and the UK. Now, because we still have access to those particular markets, OEM business cases to remain in South Africa remains a viable business case. But if the primary reasons, and this is where it gets a bit tricky, in that luxury class vehicles that we have in South Africa are making cars here for the American market, and therefore, if their sole presence in South Africa is based on accessing the American market, that business case is now has external pressure from these tariff hikes, and it's a different conversation for those particular luxury brands that are trying to access the American market. But predominantly, we still think that our market is resilient and stable, and these tariffs should not necessarily dissuade investors from investing in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Tshetlhe Litheko, chatting to us there on those new tariffs from the United States.